Okay, while we're waiting for Hans, I'm just going to do the formal roll call. It's 7:37, so Dan, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Stephen, you there?
Here.
Terry Lee?
Yes, I'm here.
Phil?
Yeah, this is Phil.
And how about Hans? Well, I don't know if he said he was going to be late. Did anybody get a message like that? I think we may need to go ahead and start. You all want to go ahead and start?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. So I'm going to follow some advice from our colleague Dan Simons. I'm going to, when I mention a topic, and if there is any discussion, I'll first ask, is there discussion? If any one person, whoever they are, and I may not know them, recognize the voice, if they say yes, then I will go down by person for comment. And we'll keep it to 2 to 3 minutes. And each person will get a chance. And then the last person who first gave the update or the recommendation will get one more chance to respond, but again, keeping it to 2 to 3 minutes at most. So that's kind of going to be how I'm going to proceed. So we kind of keep it orderly and we don't talk on top of each other. So we are now at almost 7:40 and we're going to do the approval of the agenda. Is there any discussion about the agenda first? If there is none, whether you all agree or not. We're going to go again. Dan?
Yes, I support the agenda as written.
Okay. Stephen?
No change.
Okay. Jerry Lee?
No change. Sorry, I had a problem with my mute.
That's okay. Phil?
No change.
Okay. Has Han joined the call yet? Okay. Okay, we're going to call that approved. All four in unison. Okay. Approval of minutes. We're going to start with March 9th. Is there any discussion to the minutes on March 9th? If none, I'd like to hear if there's no change or acceptance. Dan?
Acceptance?
You accept it? You approve it?
Yep.
Okay. Stephen?
What happened with changes that were going around by email?
For March 9th? Was there any change to March 9th?
I'm trying to pull it up. I thought there was a little bit on March 9th and a little bit on, I think mine was more on, mine was more on the March 9th.
This is Andrea. I can speak to that. March 9th was emailed around this afternoon and posted on the website. I changed in the last sentence, so where it used to say under Mayor's Stormwater Management Task Force on the second page, I changed the last sentence to, instead of once there's a sense of what will be put out to bid, I put may, because I think I was implying something different there when I had will. So once there's a sense of what may be put out to bid, council will have an opportunity to review the relevant drawings and documents and ask questions. And then I specified, who those questions could be to include the town engineer. So that was in the record.
All right. Andrea, would you do us a favor and just read that last sentence or how you edited that for us?
So now it reads, once there is a sense of what may be put out to bid, council will have an opportunity to review the relevant drawings and documents and ask questions, i.e. to Mayor Kaki, Town Manager Fox, the task force, contract town engineer, etc.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll go back to Dan. Are you okay with that updated change?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Stephen?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I mean, the point was that there's time to kind of review it and make sure everybody's good with it, so we're not stuck where we had to approve something and not everybody's comfortable. So that was all it was about. I think that's fine.
Okay. Jerry Lee?
Thanks, Andrea.
Yes, I concur with the minutes as amended. Thank you. And Hans is now on.
Good, okay. Hans is on. Okay, let me go to Phil. Phil, do you have, are you okay with that change?
I'm hearing, excuse me, I hear a little bit something talking over, but anyway, I am okay with the minutes with the change as read by Andrea.
Okay, good. Hans, you just came in. I don't know if you heard the last sentence. Has somebody got a phone going? And
I missed most of the discussion, so I'm, just gonna have to go by. Just have to pass.
okay, we'll pass. Okay, we'll pass on that. We have 4 in favor. Okay, approved with that change. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to go to April 3rd emergency meeting minutes. Do we have a discussion on that? Okay.
April 3rd was the one I think Andrea had pointed out that was already approved in a previous meeting. Is that right, Andrea?
No, that was March 27th, but there was a change on April 3rd. I can point that one out, and that was also emailed around this afternoon, and then that's the one that's on the website right now for residents. So I'll read it. I changed under new business, the SRTS item, see, what is that, second sentence, would now read, Councilmember Pezkowski agreed to provide a log document from these meetings with the council. The log will record progress and changes on the project. And then I think these might be, Jerry Lee, what your additions were. Mayor Kaki also agreed to contact Councilmember Pezkowski or another who is on call that day whenever a problem arises in the field that can't be easily resolved. Mayor Kaki also agreed to share the approved red line changes with the council once returned by the contractor.
Thank you, Andrea. With that change, do you want to go ahead and approve it? Is there any other discussion? Just say yes if there's discussion.
This is Phil. I don't remember the on-call person. That we spelled out some on-call person.
I stated it as a way to keep things efficient and less burdensome. That if some issue arises in the field, that whether it's you, Phil, or Steve, or whoever the council wants to be on call that day or that week, that I would call, I would give you the issue, whether I need a quick turnaround in a couple minutes or if it's, a couple hours. I would give you that time frame so that you get back to me. That was generally how it was stated.
I think it may have been said in the meeting, but I think what's worked since that time has been pretty good. I think, Kaki, you've kind of just alerted Phil and I ahead of time if you're hearing something that may be an issue. It seems like a lot of the times it's resolved by the time people even get a chance to get there. So it seems like that kind of thing for field conditions is working fine.
Okay, so we have a change, and really the question, thank you, Stephen. Really the question on the table here is, are you okay with the change? that Andrea just read aloud?
Now that I understand it, yes.
All right, so Dan, are you okay with these minutes as the change written, provided by Andrea?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and Stephen?
Yes, thanks.
And Jerry Lee?
Yes, I am. Thank you for making my changes.
And Phil, you said yes? Right?
Yes. Yes, I did.
And Hans?
I am. Yes, I am.
Okay, all right. Approved with with those changes. Okay. All right, thank you. Now we will go to, this is a little tweak here. We're going to have the presentation by residents as we normally do, but I also do want to give the opportunity for residents to raise any questions or comments at the very end of the meeting. So we'll just start. It is approximately 7:48, almost 7:49. Are there any presentations by residents on the phone? If so, just say yes first and then we'll start. Okay, there are no presentations by residents. So now we're going to go to the action item on the agenda. Okay, we're at 7:49. First action item is the adopt the corrective version of resolution to repeal charter amendment. Andrew, would you like to take that? Give a brief summary or however you think is appropriate.
Sure. Let me just get my papers here. So this was the genesis of where this came from is that the numbering, instead of where it would be, sorry, let me start over. When council adopted this at the April 3rd meeting, the numbering was not correct for the part of the charter that would be amended. So the new section was adopted as 78-29, but it should have been adopted as 78-28B. So this simply changes the numbering on the section that's amended in the charter, and then also the resolution number now would become 2020-1A to denote that this was an amendment to the original resolution. And just a reminder, I know there's been some discussion about this, so just a reminder that the resolution is very limited in its effect, and it only applies if the governor declares a state of emergency and if council then approves an ordinance thereafter. And even if an emergency is declared, the council would still need to pass an ordinance at an open meeting declaring that emergency measures with respect to the election are required. So that's it from me.
Okay, is there any discussion on this before we take a vote?
I'd like to propose some changes. This is Hans. I'd like to propose some changes in the language that we're adopting. And the reason for that is that the letter from the governor, or the pronouncement from the governor announcing this emergency and announcing that municipalities could shortcut their normal procedures to find an alternative way to running elections in the future. And the letter from the governor very specifically says that once the emergency is over, that authority will no longer be granted. So we need to change the wording to say something to the fact that that we accept this condition, and that once we accept it, and once the emergency is over, that we will sunset the related information and the related wording and the related process that we put into place for this emergency. In other words, that the governor's emergency declaration is for this specific COVID-19 emergency, and it's for the specific issue of how to manage elections in that atmosphere. When we want to discourage people from going to the polls, we want to discourage people from meeting, we want to discourage people from doing the things they do when they try to win office. And I would propose that the first sentence in section B of the proposed amendment would say, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in this charter, a coronavirus state of emergency has been declared by the governor of Maryland, period. And the reason for putting a period there is that we had put there before that declared that the governor of Maryland had within the corporate limits. The governor has never declared that there was a state of emergency within the confines of Garrett Park. He stated statewide. So it's really clear to me that what we need to do is make sure that we understand that then going on after the first sentence. So notwithstanding anything contrary to this charter, a coronavirus state of emergency has been declared by the governor of Maryland, period. Accordingly, within the corporate limits of the town, the council shall be authorized to pass this, and it goes on what we are authorized to do in this event, and so that doesn't change. What I would propose at the end of that underlined section there is this authority is granted by the governor for this emergency and this election. It's very specific. It's this emergency and this election. Everything that the town approves under this authority is no longer valid when the emergency ends and shall be expunged from the record. And that's what essentially just reinforces what Governor Hogan has said, is that, and I quote, it's a specific language in his statement, this order remains effective until the state of emergency has been terminated. And the proclamation of the catastrophic health emergency has been rescinded. So once that happens, we lose any authority to do so. And so we have to sunset our agreement here, what we proposed, when the emergency ends or is terminated.
Okay. Thank you.
We could
Hans, are you done? You did hear the beginning of this meeting. We're following a different.
I'm having a really hard time understanding.
Oh, can you hear me now? You may have on or your computer or both.
It's not doing a Zoom.
Pardon me? Hans, can you hear me now?
I'm sorry, I can't understand what's being said. When I dialed in this evening, it asked me for this. Obviously, I dialed the phone number, and then it asked me the sign-in number of the group, and it asked me for my personal ID, and I had no idea what we were talking about. I tried it 6 or 7 times, and that's why I wasn't not able to join this conversation directly. And I guess I'm going through a conference call feature that Judy has on her phone.
Kathy, you are also muffled. If you could try to improve your positioning with your mic, I think it might help.
No, I'm just speaking directly. There isn't anything I can do with my I'm looking at my screen. I have no earphones or mouthpiece, but I'm hearing Hans. So you were talking on a phone? Are you also on a website for WebEx?
My computer is old enough so that I can't update it to be. It's not compatible with WebEx technology, and I don't have the necessary software application to run it. So every time we've had one of these meetings, I've been on my phone. I work perfectly. For some reason, they persisted this evening in asking me for some kind of additional ID, which I didn't have because I didn't know what they wanted from me.
We hear you pretty well. I'm getting the sense. There's another echo somewhere. I can hear somebody else. I can hear my echo through somebody. So
Yeah, Khaki, I actually think the problem with the person with the connection problem, I think, is your connection.
Well, okay. I don't know why, but I could
If there's a
hang up.
computer and a phone on at the same time, a lot of times this will get the
No, I'm not on my phone.
just computer.
Yeah, now I can hang up and just get on my phone.
Yeah,
If you have a headset, yeah.
give that a try, Khaki. I think just go with the phone and let's see if that clears it up.
Okay. Then you all hold on a minute, or Dan, will you do me a favor?
Sure.
While I'm trying to dial in, would you explain to Hans how the format of this meeting is going to go? Because I need everybody to keep to only a couple minutes, and each person is going to get a chance to respond. Okay. So I'm gonna mute this screen, and I'm gonna dial in and see if I may even have to shut down the computer.
Yeah, I would abandon the computer entirely. That's my advice. Right on. Maybe I could make a motion to pass everything that needs to be passed. When Khaki gets back on, we can say we've accomplished it all. Why I'm not allowed to be mayor. So Hans, I think what Khaki just wanted to reiterate there, she started off the meeting by just saying she was going to try to keep things orderly. She'd call on folks as needed so we didn't talk over each other. And then anybody who was expressing an opinion would try to keep it to a minute or two so that she could just keep things moving. I think that's all she wanted me to express. And I think you did that, and that's fine. And I think when she comes back on, we can just proceed.
Hans said thank you.
Just piggybacking on what Dan was saying, I think also the idea was she was going to run through things in order, so we're, kind of everybody gets a chance if they have a comment or not to say it, and there's a chance for everybody, kind of like whoever initiated the comment, to circle back and kind of close the loop on their thought. So it's worked good so far.
Hey, I'm not sure who to ask. This is Phil. I'm not sure who to ask this to, but what happened with the version that we approved? I mean, we approved and we signed something electronically for it. Did that thing get killed? I mean, where is that, and we're making changes now. Is that one going to be, do we have to say we're amending the previous amendment, or we're killing off the previous one?
That's right. So this is Andrea. The materials were sent to the state, so then I would follow up with this, which is an amendment to the resolution. So the resolution that was adopted, that was sent to the state, is 2020-1, and so this will be 2020-1A.
And will we replace it in its entirety, or replace it only with things that have been updated?
It will replace it, I believe, in its entirety.
Okay.
Well, we have a minute, just to make sure I'm clear. It sounds like what Hans was recommending is that this thing be clear that it's a temporary charter thing, and then once the governor lifts the state of emergency related to this event, then that charter amendment would be pulled or made inactive somehow. Am I understanding that correct?
Okay, you're unmuted, Hans.
Stephen, the amendment would sunset the minute the emergency is terminated, because our authority to do anything in this was conditioned by the governor as being a result of the virus and our attempt to try to minimize the spread of the disease by not encouraging people to congregate or to campaign or to do the kinds of things that need to be elected. And it ends, our authority to do anything ends when that term is terminated. So I just want to make sure that whatever we do it in the context of this authority that we have. It starts when the governor announces the emergency, and ends when the governor announces the emergency is over.
Isn't that covered up?
Not in the-
Phil, did you ask a,
That,
I couldn't hear it.
okay, this is Phil. So wouldn't that be covered under the ordinance? Because I thought the ordinance sunsetted itself. And basically, we would have a temporary amendment to the charter. Does that mean that we would have to go reinstate the language that we previously had?
I think we
Because
should
we'd have to-
hold can we hold conversation for a minute until Kaki's able to rejoin since we're getting into details?
Sure.
Can you
Thank
all
you.
hear me?
Yes, now we can.
But I hear an echo, so I still have my screen on, and now I have my phone on. So I can turn off my computer and see if you all can hear me. I'm not hearing all you.
I can hear you now. You're just a little bit faint.
Okay, I'm feeling this. Okay. Leave the meeting. Sorry, can you all hear me now?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay.
Except for the
Well,
echo you got with you.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you hear me, but I don't really hear all you because there's too much echo. Okay.
One thing that I think would help, I see a lot of phones unmuted. If everybody mute except when they speak, that will help a lot.
Okay, I didn't hear that, but let's pick up where I left off, if you don't mind, and I apologize for the delay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, so Hans, you made your points. I'd like to hear if somebody else, Dan, would you like to make any points?
None from me. And I actually, well, maybe I'd make a sidebar point. I actually thought that I'm not really worried about this thing sunsetting because this thing doesn't allow anything to automatically happen without a council vote. So if we add the additional clarification for sunset, that's fine with me. It's also fine with me if you don't, because I feel like the mechanisms are there to not allow anything to happen without a council vote. But that's my 2 cents. I'm fine either way.
Okay, that's good to hear. Stephen, do you have anything to say?
I was curious from Andrea if there already is a mechanism in that charter amendment for such a sunset. I thought it was
This is
meant to be
Andrea.
like a temporary just for this event.
Yeah, what we talked about on April 3rd two things. So one of the things that Hans mentioned was if this ended, if this sunsets when the state of emergency ends. And one of the things that we talked about previously was that that puts us in a weird situation.
Hello, did somebody get cut off?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Andrea.
I was muted. Sorry, did you catch any of that?
You can pick up right where you were. I think we'll be okay.
I'm not sure what you heard. Sorry.
You can start again.
Start again. Okay. One of the things that was discussed at the April 3rd meeting is that if this were to sunset when the state of emergency ends, that puts us in a weird situation if it happens before our election takes place or before, well, yeah, before our election takes place, before May 4th. So that's I would not advise doing that. Part of what this was meant to do is to give flexibility in case there is an emergency in a future year. A state of emergency is declared by the governor in a future year that overlaps with an election, that we wouldn't find ourselves going round and round on this again. We would have something in place already in the charter. And if council wanted to, at that time, council could pass an ordinance at an open meeting or discuss an ordinance at an open meeting declaring emergency measures with respect to the election. So the resolution as written does not sunset, but it's by design.
And may I ask a question, Andrea? You referenced the executive order number of Governor Hogan's executive order, where enabling municipalities to amend the date, method, conduct. Does that suggest that this order is only for the pandemic?
I think that it's a little bit apples and oranges. So the governor's order allowed us to change the rules for this year in our election. The charter amendment, we could adopt one that's specific to this year, or we can adopt one that would also apply to future years if we found ourselves in the same situation.
Okay. So what we're voting on right now is to repeal and replace.
Yeah, repeal and replace what was already discussed and adopted, and to only change the numbering, basically. It would, instead of being adopted as 78-29, it would now be adopted as 78-28B.
Okay.
And it becomes Resolution 2020-1A instead of Resolution 2020-1.
Thank you. I think, did I leave off with Stephen? Stephen, did you have a point to this? Or are you okay? Before we get to any vote, I just want to know if you have any further points to make. Sorry, Stephen there? Okay, how about Jerry Lee? Are you there?
Hello?
Is that Stephen?
That's Stephen, yep.
Stephen, did you have a point to make, or can you pass?
Can anybody hear me now, or?
We can hear you.
Okay, yeah, for a while, it didn't seem like it was on. I just wanted to make sure I understood Andrea right. It sounds like she was saying that it could be possibly amended to have a 28B that would be temporary and removed after this event is gone. Did I hear you correct?
Andrea?
Yeah, I don't know about removed after it's gone, but I did ask the attorney. I forwarded what Jerry Lee had suggested for her modifications, and it can be done that way. if council wishes, could amend the charter temporarily now and then consider a permanent edit thereafter.
I'd kind of be open to discussing it, and I'm wondering if it's even that much of an emergency, right now versus doing it as this event subsides, to figure out how it might be done more generally for the future. Like, what if, does this charter amendment open the door to say there's a nasty storm and the mayor declares an emergency 2 years from now? Does that mean
It doesn't.
all of a sudden?
No, it does not. If the governor declares a state of emergency, and if the council then decides that they want to also
Oh, I know that part, the
discuss
second
and
part.
approve an ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, like, this is really, they did this just because of COVID. It's unusual. So I'm wondering if we need to keep that as a legacy in the charter or not, versus if he does a state of emergency for something completely different and it doesn't affect an election. He may not
In
do
that case,
so many.
I think council wouldn't do anything. In that case, council would probably decide not to pass an ordinance, decide not to, change anything related to the election.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you. Jerry Lee, do you have a minute or two, or do you want to pass?
No, I do have a point. So I did email in advance my suggested comment, and while I would like to see a permanent change to the charter to incorporate emergency provisions, I do think that because the governor's order is so specific to this coronavirus crisis, and I went back and reread it this weekend because of the listserv discussion about this. I don't think we actually have clear authority to make a permanent change to our charter. So I don't think there's any harm in us incorporating something that specifies that our charter change is only applicable to the 2020 election in some way, like a very small change to that. And then once we have, once things have like calmed down, we could embark on the normal public process to amend our charter for a permanent change, which I think would be a good idea. But because of the governor's order, we didn't undergo the kind of public hearings and full public notice that we would have normally done for a permanent charter change. So I'm just recommending that this charter change should be limited to the 2020 election only.
Okay, thank you, Jerry Lee. Phil, you have a comment? Phil, if you do not have a comment, just say pass. I can't hear Phil. Does anybody hear Phil? Okay. Let's see, Hans, you came back with the initial request for the change. Is there anything you want to change now that you've heard the points by your council members? Or are we okay to go now with the vote? But you have the last say, Hans.
Hans, are you still there? Hans, can you hear me?
Hello?
Yeah. Hans, Kaki asked if you have any further changes or comments.
I said my vote on this was contingent on making a change that says we have a very tight window set by the governor with the authority beginning with the declaration of an emergency and allowing us to bypass the normal charter process for establishing election procedures and short circuit that. And it ends when he decides the emergency is over. And my view is we should sunset this thing with that. We should pass it with the contingency of sunsetting it written in and clearly spelled out, number one. And number two, I completely support Jerry Lee's suggestion that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have an emergency procedure, but we should need to go through the normal channels with open hearings and advertised meetings and all that, with the necessary public sort of notices that are required. that would be expected of any change to the charter.
This is Andrea. I just want to jump in since it's been said twice now that to correct the record that we do have the authority to do this. If we didn't, our attorney would not have given us this language, and this wouldn't have been this language would not have also been provided to other towns.
To me, when the governor sets a condition and says you're free to make the changes that you wish, as long as that condition subsists. But when it ends, all authority to make any changes disappears. That to me says we have to act on his terms rather than our attorneys.
I have a comment here from Stephen, if that's okay.
Well, I was trying to get to where we could vote, but go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if maybe I didn't say it well the first time. I'm wondering if maybe it's something where we could go with what we have out there now and use that, and then also Jerry Lee's recommendation, and we have a more generalized method for protocol for emergencies in the future. I wonder if this could be punted, since we don't really need to do much more specific to this year's election. There won't be another election coming for a year, but punt it to more like the fall or summer, revisit it, and then figure out, like, is it something we want to really get once this is all said and done, get it expunged from our charter? Maybe we send something else, and then maybe that also goes with a process to do that emergency protocol. Just a thought. We could just tidy up everything in a couple months.
Right. Okay. So we have, that's one version, Stephen. Thank you. The other version is with Hans asking for language change right now. And then a third is really, it's fine as it is. So I'd like somebody to make a motion, and we can have all three voted on if you want. Or just start with Hans.
Kaki, this is Jerry Lee. I just got a text from Phil that he's muted, and he's asking to be unmuted.
I don't control it. Okay.
I think he was call-in user 5, and I don't see him up there anymore. So I'm wondering if he's calling back in now.
I don't know. He says he can hear us, but he must be muted because we can't hear him. I don't know that he knows what color.
There's a 6 now too. If he came back in as a 6.
Okay, he's offering to drive to my house. Not come with the coronavirus.
So much for this great meeting.
He's trying to get back into the call.
Make him wait on the
But
porch.
Kaki, he respectfully requests that you hold off on the vote while he tries to get back in.
Okay, Jerry Lee.
Could have invited him here, but usually I have more beer when he comes to visit. I don't have any left.
Okay, we're gonna wait. Hey, Andrea.
Yes.
I have a little symbol that shows that you're muted. Is that? But you're not, right? Jerry,
I call in on the phone because I think the audio is better. So I
okay.
never do the audio through the computer.
Oh. So you just turn your volume off on the computer?
Nope, different. I'd never even connect the audio through the computer.
You can decline the computer audio and just do it'll just show the screen prompt and call in separate.
Yes. Let me know if you hear Phil.
Okay,
So
I'm having
he's
trouble.
on his way to my porch. So I'm moving to my porch.
Okay.
And I have never had this issue before, but I now cannot unmute people. So that's fun. Okay, I have it back. Phil, is that you? Can you hear us? I'm unmuting
I can
caller
hear.
7.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can probably hear my car because I'm
Yes.
seatbelt alarm hanging.
Got you.
Second
You're
here.
okay.
What was I muted?
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but we're okay now.
Okay. Okay. Nice to see Jerry Lee. And so so I actually had some comments before somehow I got hung up. I got stuck there. So my first comment is this. If we try and sunset this thing, then we should probably run it by the lawyer to make sure that it's okay, that we can do that. That's number one. Number two is, if we sunset it, that means that we have to have something to take its place. Otherwise, as soon as this thing goes away, we'll have nothing. And so, unless this is simply an addition, which I thought that we were actually replacing a piece of the charter. Maybe I'm wrong.
Sounds like
It's
it
an
was a
addition.
permanent
It's an addition.
addition.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if we were to sunset,
I'm sorry. Hans had a comment to answer Phil.
Phil, I was thinking, we're doing on the short-circuited procedure that this exception from the governor allows us without going through the formal process that's longer and has more public involvement, which we need in order to do an act on our own, which is what Jerry Lee suggested. You know, go and short-circuit this thing now because it's based on a specific event during a specific period of concern and emergency. When that goes away, our authority disappears with it. So whatever we put in place has no standing. So I would suggest that what we do is we revisit the question of whether or not we want a security procedure and protocol as part of a regular change to the charter and or the ordinances.
Right, but so no, I understand that. But what I'm wondering is, this is basically an amendment to the charter. In other words, if this sunsets, we won't have a problem where we've now got a hole in the charter. This is going to not replace anything other than obviously the previous language.
The fact is that the governor's protocol and rule and guidelines precede anything that we have.
This is Andrew.
Right.
What the attorney said was
His letter.
Can I give the legal opinion on that?
Absolutely.
So this is Andrew. What the attorney said, I'll just repeat it, is that if you adopt something temporary now, because I asked that question and he said that council could amend the charter temporarily now and then consider a permanent edit thereafter. So I don't know that gives us a perfectly clear answer to your question, Bill, but just wanted to tell you that.
So, okay, but we won't have a problem with the charter if we have this thing sunset. We could do it, or do we have to basically do a temporary amendment and come back and do a permanent amendment? See what I mean?
Because the fact is that the governor's dictate says it will end, our authority will end the minute he cancels the emergency. It will have no standing. The only alternative we have is to go through the formal process, which is what Jerry suggested.
This is Andrea. To be clear, what I sent the attorney was Jerry Lee's edit, which is different than what Hans is suggesting.
Hans said he understood. I didn't unmute him fast enough.
And my question was, this is just an addition to our authority for the specific case. This is not something that once it sunsets itself or whatever, we won't be left with a problem where the charter's got a hole in it, if you will.
Put in whatever we put in it was strictly based on the window the governor defined. I grant you the authority now, but it ends. The authority ends when they cancel the emergency.
So, well,
But I think,
Go ahead.
I do think to address Andrea's concern about the governor's emergency, we should frame our sunset based on our own election, not based on the governor's state of emergency.
yeah, we have to.
Okay, can you all hear me? Okay. Let's, I think we beat this around a bit. I think there's 2 ways to go on this. One is we take a vote to ask if this motion is approved as is. If that's not unanimous, then, or not by majority, then we ask if you want to make this change now or change something later. Okay?
I have a question. I was wondering if some of us may be kind of torn between partially supporting various options here. Does it possibly make sense that Andrea could go and revisit the whole issue with these kind of questions just with the town attorney and then get back to us all to see if it's, what we could do with some of these concerns? We'll have something that hangs around in the books related to a specific event or that it gets through the election, et cetera, et cetera.
I could, it puts us in a bit of a weird spot. Like I said, this has already been, there's multiple forms that have to be filled out and sent to the state, and that was already done with the previous version. That has to be corrected with new numbering, whatever is decided. So in the meantime, the state would have our paperwork essentially with the wrong numbering. But we do have a resolution that was adopted. We do have an ordinance that was adopted. We do have the plan that was adopted by reference in the ordinance. So it's not like we're operating without anything. Just wanted to
I'm just wondering if we could assuage all these concerns without having to send in any documents. We just may decide in the end that stand pat with it.
Yeah, and the version that I sent to Ron that had Jerry Lee's changes, they're pretty minor changes. So it's the original language, except that there's a change that says, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in this charter, and then Jerry Lee suggested the language, due to the state of emergency declared by the governor of Maryland, and then the language continued. So it's not just if a state of emergency has been declared, it's due to the state of emergency that was declared by the governor. And then it goes on, and in the 4th line down, she inserts where it right now says emergency election procedures as may be deemed necessary as a result of the state. She included emergency election procedures for 2020. So her language references that it's this state of emergency specifically, and that it's the emergency election procedures for 2020. And that's what I sent to Ron, and where he said we could amend the charter temporarily now and then consider a permanent edit thereafter.
Okay. Thanks. Sounds good to me.
I think that's what you're saying, yeah.
Yep.
Andrea, to be clear, he was okay with the version I sent. Is that what that meant?
Yeah, so I sent him your version, and his response, he clarified when we started out with this item, what I explained. He clarified that, saying that this is the original language is limited in scope, require an ordinance, all of that. And then he also said, if the council wishes, it could amend the charter temporarily now and then consider a permanent edit thereafter. And that's based on your version. So he didn't have any further red lines to your edits.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
This is Phil. So to me, it sounds like that would actually take care of what Hans was thinking about in terms of it sunset itself basically with this particular election, and it would give us some time, but not put us into a quandary if for some reason the state of emergency were canceled before the election were taken care of.
Is that a question to Hans?
Jackie, I couldn't hear what you said.
I said, was that a question to Hans, or does somebody want to make a motion?
This is I'll make a motion to pass the version as amended that I sent out over the weekend that Andrea just read.
So this is Phil. I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor? Let's go by roll call. Dan?
Aye.
Okay. Stephen?
Sorry, I was muted. Aye.
All right, Stephen. Okay. And Jerry Lee, of course, you've raised that. Okay. Phil, and you seconded. Hans?
Sorry, Hans, go ahead.
No.
Is that a yes?
Say it again, Hans.
No.
Okay, so we've got 4 that say yes. We have 1 that says no. Still have 2/3 vote, so this passes with those changes. Thank you. Okay, now we move to the adoptive corrective version of the ordinance, the declaration of a state of emergency.
That's right.
And Andrea, do I need to restate an emergency?
I would go through everything that you went through last time, just to be safe. And this changes the ordinance number, and just a reminder to folks that will also by reference incorporate the emergency plan.
So as declared an emergency by the Governor of Maryland, I hereby declare a state of emergency exists. That's it. Now, is there any discussion? Okay. If there is no discussion, is there a motion?
Jackie, actually, I have a question. When we approve the ordinance, is that fully inclusive of the plan, the emergency plan?
This is Andrea. Khaki, you want me to take that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yes, it incorporates the emergency plan by reference, and also under the other safety measures, there is some language that says may implement such other measures as are consistent, that either Louise or I could do that. So there is sort of a window if changes needed to be made in the future. But yes, it incorporates it by reference.
That on page 3.
I do have a suggested change to the emergency plan. And I sent it over the weekend. Kaki, do you want me to explain it now?
Well, this is for Andrea, so.
Okay, Andrea, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I just suggested one small change to the emergency plan, which is under the section labeled vote count / ballot handling. Item number 12. I suggested that, I'll just read it. Election service provider will conduct video conference with town manager, town assistant, and election judges. And at that point, I put a period and added the start of a new sentence. The election judges will adjudicate ballots that did not scan and write-ins not selected, but written on ballot, period. I added the period. And a new sentence, the town manager and town assistant may provide assistance as requested by the election judges. The purpose of this change is to just make it clear the roles of the election judges versus the town manager and town assistant in that video conference with the election service provider. It's just for clarity. I have no concerns with the ordinance itself, just the election plan I thought needed clarification.
Are you okay with that, Andrea?
Yeah, that's fine. The original language, I was trying to just keep it as consistent as it would have been in previous years, understanding that this is a little bit of a different scenario. So, I mean, Elizabeth and I are very aware of our roles, and we don't, we stay in our lane when it comes to the election. We don't try to get involved where we shouldn't be, but at the same time, we're typically in the room, and the residents are, 2 yards away from where ballots are being counted. So this would sort of be a similar scenario.
Right, and your role is more in research and assistance. It's not adjudicating.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Logistical, not electoral.
Yep.
Okay. Is it necessary then to change this? Do we want to change this? Andrew, it sounds like Jerry Lee does. All right. Dan, do you want to make a change? Or do you have a point? Do you want to pass?
I'll pass.
Okay, Stephen, do you want to make a point or pass?
I support those changes Jerry Lee mentioned.
Bill, do you want to make a point or pass?
The question first. Do we have allowance for write-ins?
No.
Do we have allowance for write-ins?
No.
So that would be the only change I would have, because I think it said something about write-ins. Didn't it? I might be wrong, then.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm looking at it. Trying to think of why it's written that way. Yeah, no, that's, I think we could probably strike that. Just will adjudicate ballots, maybe just leave it general.
I'm fine with that.
Where do you see that?
So it's in that number 12 on the third page.
Okay.
And so it would now read, with Jerry Lee's edits, it would now read, election service provider will conduct video conference with town manager, town assistant, and election judges. The election judges will adjudicate ballots. The town manager and town assistant may provide assistance as requested by the election judges.
Okay. All right. Does anybody want to take a motion on this? Well, the ordinance includes this, so Hans, I'm sorry, did I ask you if you wanted a point or pass? Now.
Yeah, I had, the comment I had made on point number 12 was that we would simply delete town manager, town assistant, so that it says that the service provider can conduct with the election judges to and only add if they needed consultation with the town manager and town assistant. And the reason from when we last did the rewrite of the laws having to do with the management of elections and trying to get as much as possible to distance and separate the existing officers or anybody who was a candidate from having a say in it, was that we were also essentially this town staff reports to us as a council. As an elected body, whether it's the mayor or the council, and would have may feel some pressure to go to one candidate or another, and we didn't want to expose them to that pressure. So we said, let's set up the election judges who would be in charge of making all those decisions. If they needed to converse with it, they could approach the town manager and his or her assistant. Questions, but essentially the election judges should make that call so as to be completely to have a wall between those running and those interpreting the results of the election.
So Andrea, I don't see any difference with what you just said. I mean, and from what Hans is trying to say, I think the edits now, as proposed by Jerry Lee, and in your case, sort of set that boundary. Is there any other difference here? Andrea there? Andrea, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know it was directed at me.
Yeah, what I just said was.
I don't know. I mean, Hans, initially you had emailed me with feedback when it said town staff or the town office or something instead of the town manager and town assistant. And so I had changed that language in a later version to say the town manager and town assistant. I mean, this is really me wearing my clerk hat, and in other jurisdictions that are larger, clerks are very involved with elections, so it's not inappropriate for a clerk to be involved in an election or to run the election. I do understand and respect the role of the election judges, and it's their role to adjudicate the ballots, and that's how it's been set up. But I think that's a little bit of a difference for what you were saying there. In a typical year, there isn't the wall that you're speaking of, and there isn't even a wall between residents and what's happening when the ballots are being counted. So this is trying to keep it similar to previous years.
Again, we rewrote the election rules, which is 3, maybe 4 years ago now. One of the things that we weighed into consideration was whether we would be exposing you and any town staff to pressure, whether intended or not, to try to do include some interpretive sort of decision making in this process. And we were basically saying if we would like to shield the town staff from having to be exposed to that. That's the perspective I'm coming from.
So can I make a comment? This is Jerry Lee. So the concern I have, Hans, is that if we take them out of the video meeting, they're not in the room to be able to offer assistance if the judges ask for it. Because in a normal year, they would be in the room but quiet until the judges asked for their help. Do you see what I mean? By inviting them to the video conference.
No, I have no problem with that. I mean, it's hard to, I'm not sure what the right wording is to say we encourage their presence, but we want to discourage their being involved in making the adjudicating areas of conflict or perceived conflict. That's all.
Okay. That language was.
There's no clear line you can draw here. It's just so maybe that's why we've always said, well, not always said, but when we rewrote these things, we said let's do everything we can to make sure that the burden of any decision that might affect the outcome of an election should fall on somebody who's neutral, or hopefully neutral, but called election judge, as opposed to somebody who might be implicated as a staffer to one some person as opposed to another person. That's all.
Right. So this.
I don't want to get hung up on this point. I just want to make the point that it's important to do as much as we can to have the election judges bear the brunt of the burden for running elections. Somebody who has either directly or indirectly a vested interest in the outcome.
Okay, Hans, can you hear me? Okay. Listen, Andrea.
Hello?
Everybody's manifest. I think it's taking care of all the concerns.
Jackie, we're having a lot of trouble hearing you.
I'm having trouble hearing you, but please, Andrea, read the revised wording for number 12.
Sure. Yep. Election service provider will conduct video conference with town manager, town assistant, and election judges. The election judges will adjudicate ballots. The town manager and town assistant may provide assistance as requested by the election judges.
Thank you. Adjudicating, you're providing logistical and research support if you have to go find some address or something. Okay. Then that.
This is Phil again. Would we want to change it to say that the town election judges will be the sole adjudicators to make it a little more specific?
Great idea.
Okay, is that what, Andrea, are you okay with that?
It's not my ideal, but it's fine. Well, if it makes it more difficult that day, we'll just deal with it.
Okay, so back with the motion. If anybody would like to make the motion with that change in number 12.
So I'll make the motion to adopt it as modified by Jerry Lee with the small addition that I just made.
Need a second.
I'll second it. So, Stephen.
Stephen. Okay, Dan, are you in favor?
I am. Yes.
Stephen, you are. Jerry Lee, are you in favor?
Yes, I'll be in favor this time.
Bill, you are. Hans, are you in favor?
I'm sorry, who did you ask?
Hans?
Hans, could you hear?
I do now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Kaki's asking for your vote.
I've asked 3 times to see whether or not I can have it reread to me what we're saying now.
Oh, so I reread it. It was as I amended it with the change that Phil added, that the election judges will be the sole adjudicators of the ballots.
Okay, I can work with that.
Could you hear that, Andrea and Kaki? Could you hear Hans?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Yes.
With the change, with Phil's change, that makes sense to me.
That was unanimous vote. Approved. Thank you. Are we ready to move on to the pesticide ordinance?
Yes.
Okay, so we are looking at approximately 8:52 on the time. Jerry Lee, would you like to take that action?
So the county amended its county code related to pesticides, that's section 33B, and it took effect in June of 2019. Because of Garrett Park's stature as a separate independent municipality, we are not automatically opted in to the county's pesticide code. Garrett Park would like for the pesticide code of the county to apply in Garrett Park equally. We need to opt through change. There are a lot of benefits to this. One benefit is that it will be less confusing for residents because they will, when they hear about the to provide any, or we would not be required to create any separate rules about pesticide application in Garrett Park. There are also environmental benefits to this change because it encourages the use of synthetic chemicals and chemicals that are dangerous both to shade trees and to the watershed that we are all very close to by being so close to Rock Creek Park, the Chesapeake watershed. I presented this proposal to the Arboretum Committee, and in the meeting this past week, the committee voted to support Garrett Park opting in to the county's pesticide ordinance, particularly on the grounds that it is beneficial to the shade trees here in Garrett Park not to have pesticide applications on lawns and in their town trees. There are a lot of exemptions to this so that people who need to address invasive weeds or biting insects, pesticides or herbicides, and it only applies to lawns, mulched areas, and playgrounds. I also consulted with the pool, and the president of the pool board confirmed that it would not cause a negative impact on the operations of the pool facility. So with that, Andrea arranged for the town attorney to provide the draft ordinance that was posted on the website, and it includes some conforming amendments to the town's code of ordinances to add this section to the list of county codes that the town already opts into. So it adds this 33B as a section that the town would additionally add to its own code of ordinances as being applicable in Garrett Park. If we pass this ordinance at the next regular council meeting in May, then this would take effect at a date that we specify in the ordinance. Currently, that is June 1st, but we could opt to add a grace period and have a later effective date if we think that that is necessary to help with notice in the town. So that's my brief on the proposal.
Okay, is there any discussion?
So this is Phil. I've got a question. Who will adjudicate this and who will enforce it? Does the town need to do anything, or is it going to be totally through the county?
So we had Mary Travellini at the March meeting from the county. She works in the county's Department of Environmental Protection, and the county provides enforcement mechanisms, and they also provide education and information about it. In fact, there was a mailer sent to Garrett Park last week. The enforcement is pretty minimal, though. It is based on a pretty minimal fine. I believe it's $50, and it's complaint based. So they do not send inspectors around looking for violations. They only follow up on complaints that are made by neighbors, or perhaps if the town were to complain about a situation.
Okay, I'm gonna go over to Dan. Do you have a point? Or want to pass?
Pass.
Stephen, do you have a point, question, or do you want to pass?
Pass.
Okay, Hans, do you have a point or want to pass?
I just want to say I support this 100%. I think it's really important for the town of Garrett Park to be a part of this and to be practicing what we all like to preach.
Okay. And Phil, did we answer your question?
Yes. No further comments.
Gary Lee, is there one last thing you want to address?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. So does anybody want to make a motion?
Hello, this is I move we adopt.
Okay. Second?
Seconded. This is Dan.
Okay. So all in favor? Dan?
Aye.
Stephen?
Aye.
Gary Lee?
You have to vote. She's good.
Did she say yes?
I'm sorry, Khaki, did you ask me for my vote? This is Jerry Lee. I vote yes to introduce it
Thank you.
for
Phil?
adoption.
Yes, I vote to introduce it.
Okay, I know. And Hans? Hans, just say yes.
He started it, didn't he?
I know, but now we're on,
Okay.
it's a roll call, so.
Got it.
He provided an emphatic yes in his commentary.
Okay, good enough. That's unanimous, 5. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry Lee and Andrea, for all the work on that.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock. We don't have any new business?
And Khaki, we actually need to go back up and adopt the ordinance. We did the plan. I know we all agreed to the plan, but I just wanted to be clear that we're all adopting the ordinance because I have to have 4 votes because of the emergency.
Yeah, we adopted the ordinance with the plan changed for number 12.
Okay.
Right, and we had a 4.
Is that 4 or 5? Charter was 4.
Yeah, the charter.
I have 5 for the plan because Phil had the motion, Stephen second, and then Dan, Jerry Lee, and Hans were yes. I just wanted to be clear that was the ordinance as well as the plan.
Yeah, it was. It was the ordinance with the plan with change in 12. Okay. 9:01, let's go to town updates. And we're going to make a run through this, try to keep everything brief. As I mentioned to council members, we're doing this update with all these delegated areas so that we have them for the town record.
Khaki? Did you want to talk about the budget, see if council wanted to consider it or not for tonight?
You know what? Yes, of course. I had it and then it slipped. Go ahead, Andrea.
Okay. I sent this out pretty last minute and put it up on the website today, sent it out to council today, so I apologize for that. This has been a race to try to get all the things done that need to be done, but got it there. So I just wanted to start the conversation first by maybe, Khaki, maybe we could do a roll call and see who's comfortable discussing it today or who would prefer to talk about this during a special meeting, perhaps this Friday at 5 o'clock. We can take it from there.
Okay.
This is Phil. I'd like to make a suggestion. We do it Friday at 5.
Yes, on Friday. Start with Dan.
I'd go with Friday at 5, just so I have time to review it and can really focus on it. I've got a hard stop at 9:30 tonight, so Friday's better for me.
Okay. Stephen?
Same.
Jerry Lee?
The 5 o'clock Friday.
Phil?
Yep.
Majority. Hans?
Yes. Friday, I need time to digest this. I started going through the explanatory notes, Andrea, and I've had some difficulty understanding what you were doing. So maybe you and I can talk about that offline.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, so this budget will be discussed on Friday. It'll be a public meeting.
So hard to hear.
And it will be introduced. Keep ahead of the curve. Andrea?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that last part.
So Andrea, we are going to have this rescheduled for discussion and introduction on Friday. It's a public meeting.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So now we can move on to the town updates. 904, I'll start with the SRTS project, but I want to repeat what we're doing here. We're just giving very brief update, sort of where things last were, where things are next step, and it's all for the benefit of the town record. So as we turn the page on a new council, we've got the latest information that we need. So I expect it to be really brief. I know everybody's interested in the SRTS project. I can tell you that we are getting very close to finishing Oxford. And they're starting on Claremont. We've seen the stakeout already. Had many meetings with residents and with engineers and the arborists, the stakeout. And now it looks like we may start seeing the asphalt getting cut on Wednesday, starting this week. We have the superintendent is out for this week. I don't know about next week. So we have another person stepping in her shoes, and that person will be around this week, maybe even next week.
Do they have a forecast for Kenilworth?
Stephen and Phil. I've been talking with other residents, and we've made red line changes that all the residents who are impacted have seen them, and as well as Phil and Stephen.
Super quick question. Did they, does the contractor give any kind of forecast on their ideas for Kenilworth? For schedule?
We haven't even approached that.
Yeah, okay,
We're doing one street section at a time.
sure.
Okay. Can we move on to the next? Composting. Jerry Lee.
Okay, thank you. So we're done with SRTS. Okay. So for composting, it's a very quick update based on a request from a resident that we explore potential town subsidy of composting pickup service. I volunteered to explore options for this, and Joanne Schmader was kind enough to draft a town survey to gauge interest among residents for such a service. We have a draft survey, and it is currently circulating amongst the town council members and with the mayor and town office. And once we have those edits within about a week to 2 weeks, we will conduct a survey of town residents to gauge interest, and then based on the results, we'll see what we want to what proposals we have from there. That's my update. Any questions?
Thank you, Jerry Lee.
Yes, so the Arboretum update is that Jenny Krivonic at this past week's meeting was voted as the new chair of the Arboretum Committee. And it did because of the coronavirus situation and the availability of town staff, there have been delays in plans for spring planting this year, but the committee is exploring some planting options for potentially 2 trees for the Waverly area near the tennis courts, where the vendor who would provide the trees would also do the planting. The committee agreed to pursue that option. There is budget available under the tree for the purchase of the trees that would also cover this small additional cost for the planting as well, if the council is comfortable with that. And the committee felt strongly that this might be sort of a positive, have a positive effect in town to show that we're able to move forward with tree planting at this time.
Thank you. What about the 5G and small cell towers?
I listened to a webinar about that last week, and the main thing is that we are expecting a reintroduction of the ZTA to amend the 5G ordinance in the county in June. All action is currently on delay because of the coronavirus crisis. There are additionally 2 legal cases that relate to the county open related to the case, but not any specific action at the moment. So when we get closer to that June reintroduction, Phil or I will have another update.
Thank you. Stephen, how about land use and historic preservation?
Knock out the historic first. It was pretty limited. There was nothing major over the winter, but a lot of the committee's work has been towards building momentum off of the Richter Bill tour that was very successful, and trying to further additional outreach and interest around town about all the historic assets that we have. So there was a lot of talk about doing those. Land use committee, we had work started on analyzing corners, and the land use advisory committee had a clear opinion on that, it's something that should be looked into for a potential change to the ordinance on certain types of corner lots. That's a little bit separate from the issue of the detached accessory dwelling units, which could occur on corners. But what I'd like to do is going forward, it wouldn't be during COVID, but after COVID, figure out the best plan of attack to look at those 2 issues, plus the land use task force. There were 10 or 11 recommendations from 8 or 10 years ago. Bring all those back together and look at those with a lawyer, either the town attorney, the contract attorney, or somebody that's perhaps more of a specialist on land use, to figure out what's the best way the town could have meetings and get all that adopted, because part of it would be changing the county code that has a Garrett Park overlay specific to Garrett Park. It has a lot of items in it about the accessory dwellings that we'd have to change. So I think that would be probably a good thing to just do it all together. So that's land use. Go ahead to, unless there are any questions, I can go ahead to town hall. So are there any questions? Okay, go ahead. So I put together some preliminary, just super rough numbers of what various stage or various levels of renovation might be. And when we had the public meeting, that was a great session, bringing in all kinds of residents and looking at the history and what the potential is for the place, and then figuring out what everybody's needs and wants are for that building. There were things that varied as much as renovating it pretty well within the existing shell to as elaborate as the plan I think Phil and I most support, which is to replace the addition on the back, renovate the main building, and build a basement underneath to kind of get some of the back of house functions down below. So the shorter end of those kind of ranges, that could be like in the 700,000 to 800,000 range, and then something where you go a lot further. It could be as much with the basement. It could be double that, and something in between is renovating with a new addition in the back. Then maybe that's somewhere in between. So I was just trying to get a rough idea of that. So I want to be able to take diagrams further on this, take it into the fall, and then post COVID. If we could have another meeting to show those diagrams, show the potential prices, and then just check everybody's kind of appetite around town to see how elaborate of a renovation everybody feels is necessary, and how we could fund that. So that's sort of the update for town hall.
Archives, Phil?
Okay, so for archives, Claire's been able to take advantage of this time with no public visitation to do some real nice cataloging and putting things up on the internet. So she's continuing to do that. She's got some nice pictures up already in some of the collections. So I would suggest everybody take a look at that. And then I can jump off to traffic and parking. As everybody knows, we've made an offer to somebody to do the parking enforcement. However, we're still waiting to kind of see how things play out with COVID-19 before an offer is actually made. And part of that may also be dependent on what our town revenues look like. And also, we've got a name of a person from CSX who's involved, who could be involved with the moving of the poles. And an interesting thing we found out was that while some of the poles are owned by Pepco, there may be one or two owned by Mark. And I believe that could have been caused because CSX may have given Mark the old footprint of the old train station, and therefore Mark would actually, or the state would actually own those poles, which may be to an advantage if it's possible to get some state money, for instance, to help move the pole. And that's it for that.
Thank you, Phil. Dan, do you have anything quick on the communications?
Yeah, just very, very briefly. It looks like there was some progress, made by the committee in the town with communications, just on the recent topic of moving the town forum, kind of off of its website home, where it was clearly pretty ineffective and sort of hidden and not really well used, and just moving it over to a Google group. That information went out. Admittedly, I haven't been doing much with that committee, but Dan DeVise has kind of kept all those communications flowing. And so that information has been disseminated, that the forum is now a Google group. And if anybody, missed that update, I can forward you an email about it. But that's the latest news there from that committee.
What about the train whistle?
Train whistle? Yes, I've decided to eliminate the train tracks in town, and we're going to have that disbanded. So there'll be no more trains or whistles.
Okay.
Hey, this is Phil. I'll just throw in a couple of comments. I've been doing a little bit of looking in the background, and one of the things is that as a group, as part of the committee for the train whistle, we're going to probably have to sit down and draw up a specification with some deliverables, some things that we would want an engineer to do, and then go out and try and get some rough orders of magnitude as to what that work would cost us, given the possibility that we may not have the revenue that we're expecting next year. We may have to kick this out to like 2022 or further. But for right now, I think the next thing should be to research some organizations that might be able to do the work, research some type of scope that we would need and some type of deliverables so that we could put together some type of request for bid that we could have people look over and then give us an order of magnitude that we could come back to the council with and say, okay, this is about what we think it'll cost. What does everybody think?
Sounds good. Thank you. And Hans, how about anything more on the pedestrian warning light on Strathmore?
heard something, but I couldn't understand what you're saying.
Khaki, there's a train, so if you could just pause for just a moment. I'm not sure Hans will be able to be heard because of the train for a moment.
Sure. The train just went by your thing.
Yes, the irony is not lost on anyone. Okay, I think you're safe to talk, Hans. She was asking for the update on the Strathmore pedestrian.
Yeah, I last talked to Jared Sullivan about this. He's one of our delegates, District 18, in January, and he was on note. And then the virus hit, and so really very little is happening as far as doing lower level projects like this. I essentially asked him to see if he could pull together the delegation staff to see if they could come up with a draft, and that's where it stands.
Okay. Thank you. Andrea, do you want to give us a report?
Yes, just real quickly. The more extended report is in my manager's report, which is on the website, but there were 2 new building permits between the last meeting and now. One was 10809 Keswick for a storage shed. One was 10700 Montrose for a addition, as well as a new deck and screened porch on the back of the house, and extending the current driveway to the new garage. For this year's election, I think everybody on this call realizes at this point it's entirely vote by mail. If anybody has questions or you're unsure if you're registered, please contact the town office. Ballots were printed today, so those should be, they're either mailed out today or will go out tomorrow. In terms of COVID-19, my update here is just a rehash of updates that are on the website. So if anybody is curious to learn more, please see the website. Otherwise, town office and maintenance highlights. The 2 new light poles went up. They do have LED light bulbs in them, so if you want to see what that looks like, take a look. We are moving forward with buying the new dump truck and plow. I think that's about it. I think everybody's kind of covered everything else. No more from me.
Thank you. Andrea, where are the 2 light poles?
They are, let's see, their numbers 8 and 12. So one is, not sure exactly how to describe it, up a little bit from Weymouth and Knowles. And then the other one is on the opposite side of the street, closer to kind of Keswick, where Knowles turns into Strathmore.
So
Raleigh, I guess, actually, right?
yeah, so it's the first one down from Raleigh on the same side, and then the other one is the second one up towards Garrett Park from Weymouth on the other side of the street. So it's the Weymouth side of the street, second one up. The 2 that don't have numbers at the base. That is.
Okay. Thank you.
Hans had a comment or a question.
Andrea?
Yes.
Andrea? Have we looked at on the new dump truck, have we looked at the possibility of getting one that's hybrid or electric?
I don't think so. We were going off of state contract pricing.
Yeah, it might be worth it just to do a quick thing. Something available. It'd be cool if we had one.
That would definitely restart the process for us. So we've been doing this over the last few months, talking to different dealers.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was just curious because it might be worth, if I can't imagine that there's for a small vehicle like that they're available, but they might be.
I can certainly ask the question.
And the EV charging stations that you're looking at for Penn Place, are those fee for service, or are they free?
I couldn't totally understand that question, but yes, I talked to Petco about
the electronic charging stations that you're thinking about or looking into for Penn Place,
right,
or the surrounds. Are those fee for service based, or are they free?
not free. The
So
user pays.
you put a credit card in and then charge as much. 20 minutes. Okay, good.
Yep, and the locations would have to be only places that are available to the public. So we couldn't really co-opt one for town use.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think that concludes the town council meeting tonight.
Kaki, did you want to give
Just had another question.
Are we on to the financials on the year for 2020?
Could you hear that?
So that, yeah, the March revenues, operations, capital budgets are at expected levels, and total revenues and expenses are within projections.
It looks like my comment was simply that we're looking really good as far as revenues concerned. I hope you enjoy that because I doubt that next year is going to be as rich.
Yeah, that's right.
And there was a question I had on. We're down to half of the revenues that we're getting. That we're supposed to get from the state of Maryland. Do you think that that's realistic that we will make up the other half in the last 3 months of the year?
Yeah, I looked into this, and I can't remember off the top of my head now what it was, but I think it's something that's cyclical.
So you're not uncomfortable with that?
No, I'm not.
Okay, and then I see that the number for local income taxes is up. We've gotten 76% of what we budgeted, so we've got a quarter to go. And I'm wondering if that's part of the pattern as well, or are we likely to recover that before the end of the year? So this is line item 2.2, which is personal income taxes. And we budgeted 431, and we're about 100,000 under that.
Yeah, and both income and property have certain months that are larger months than other months. I'd have to look. Like looking at March from FY19, looks like we had even less revenue, but that our end of year was high.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any questions or comments from residents? There are no questions or comments from residents.
Kaki, Hans had another question on the operation.
Andrea, on the operation side, it looks like all of the town admin, not all of them, most of it are way down. Do you understand what's happening there, or is this unexpected, or we're down, looks like at a quarter at the most for line items 11.2 through 11.4. A quarter of what as opposed to, which is good because our expenses are way down. The question is
11.3 is a lot of that is attendance at the MML conference, and 11.4 some fees are a part of that are fixed, like our audit and our videography was somewhat fixed until now, and then some of these are more variable. And a lot of these certainly have been thrown off by coronavirus.
I can understand that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Andrew, this is Phil. Hey, one quick thing I noticed was that when I brought up the things that you had attached to the meeting minute or to the meeting invite, 2 of the tabs said Town of Chevy Chase.
Yeah, I don't know why it said that on which document was that on? It was on the ordinance.
ordinance and then the charter amendment.
And resolution?
And I'm wondering
Probably, yeah.
if the source document might have had something to do with Chevy Chase, and that's how it read it.
Well, I think Ron is their attorney as well, and so they're probably ahead of us. It has to do with how you name files, and sometimes when you save a PDF, the initial name of the file, depending on how you saved it in Word, sometimes transfers over to the top of the PDF, but not the title of the document. So it's not the title of the document, but somehow it's in the online version of it.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking of eliminating confusion for residents. Other than that, I mean, it's quite obvious as soon as you open it what it is.
Yeah. I'll make a note. I'll get in there and fix it. I think I can do that with Adobe. Thank you.
Okay, now are there any questions or comments from residents? Okay, meeting is adjourned. It's 9:29. Good night.